What can I say? He graduated with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1980, and a couple of years later, he earned his wings. He doesn't know this, but my father was a flight test pilot, so I always loved pilots. Anyway, operationally, I think he's done it all. The little bio says that he's been on 12 different aircraft carriers and flown 52 different kinds of aircraft themselves. But he also had one of those desk jobs. Shoreside, he's worked from Paycom to Norfolk with what I would call a DC crunch in between. There was a period of time when he worked as a liaison between the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the U.S. Congress, and we all know that must have been a ball of fun. And of course, he's now here, more or less locally, because he's the director of the Maritime Headquarters with the U.S. Fleet Force Command. Thank you, Rear Admiral, for being here.
Thank you very much. If you notice that I just shook hands with my left hand, that's because I had shoulder surgery 2 weeks ago, and the right arm is useless. Very challenging for an Italian to give a speech with only one hand to use. So if I'm a little bit garbled, you'll know why this morning. The first step in solving a problem that you have is in admitting that you have a problem. So I am an information and an oceanography and meteorology user. I have a problem because I want perfect information all the time as a fighter pilot and as a leader of military forces to do the bidding of the nation. But I don't have that from the oceanography and meteorology communities. But I'll talk about that a little bit. Pretty interesting, Congressman Ridgell's speech reminded me of the thing that we need to talk about, and it leads me to relay a little Johnny joke to you. So on the first day of school, the teacher of a fourth grade class asked her class to go home that night, think about what they did over the summer, come back and relay a story that had a moral to the story. So the next day the class comes back, and little Jane raises her hand and she says, well, we live on a farm, and we had a tremendous time in the middle of the summer in July. All the chickens laid eggs, and we had over 200 eggs. And we put them in a basket, put it in the back of the truck, and I drove with Mommy and Daddy to the market. But Daddy hit a bump with the truck, and the basket all fell out, and the eggs broke. And the moral of that story, teacher, is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And the teacher said, that's fantastic, Jane, you get an A. And little Johnny's raising his hand. So she says, okay, Johnny, what's your story? Well, over the summer, my Uncle Bob passed away. Uncle Bob was a Navy fighter pilot. He was an F-4 pilot in Vietnam. And every time he went flying, he flew with a submachine gun, a bottle of whiskey, and a machete in his flight gear. Well, one time he was flying and he got shot down with a surface-to-air missile. And when he found himself in his parachute, he pulled out the bottle of whiskey and he drank it all. And as he was coming down, he was getting shot at by people on the ground, so he pulled out the submachine gun and he was shooting back, and he killed a bunch of the bad guys. And then when he landed, he realized he was out of bullets, so he threw the submachine gun at the bad guys, killed another one, pulled out his machete and charged. They all ran away, and Uncle Bob was saved. And the teacher says, wow, what is the moral of that story, little Johnny? And he says, well, it's obvious, teacher, don't mess with Uncle Bob if he's been drinking. So what is, I don't want to talk about Uncle Bob, but I do want to talk about all the eggs in one basket, I think, which is what Congressman Ridgell alluded to. And it's very important when we talk about oceanography, meteorology, the science, and information. Because there's two, for a fighter pilot, there's two kinds of weathermen that are good. One is the weatherman that is always correct, because you know when you get to the target exactly what the weather's going to be like, you know exactly the right tactics and the right weapons to use to be successful. The other weatherman that's good for us is one that's always wrong. Because you know, when you get to the target, it's not going to be what was predicted, so you plan your tactics and your weapons exactly the opposite from what he or she briefed. But in either case, you can't have somebody give you with certainty, this is exactly what you're going to find. And I think Dr. Sullivan alluded to that a little bit, is we're striving for perfect information about our environment, about the oceans. As in the Navy, we need that information, and we would love it to be perfect. And if it was perfect, guess what? We probably wouldn't need navies anymore. We probably wouldn't need armies anymore, because that kind of great information and the ability to predict the future with certainty would lead to a much more peaceful world. So you can't put all your eggs in the one basket of a prediction that you get from the information provided in meteorology and oceanography. What we need as operational commanders, what all of the leaders in the civilian community, in government, and in the military need is a range of options. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about. What I will talk a little bit about today is options and information and how that's used and the freedom of information. And I'm going to talk about a readiness kill chain because when you have a conference like this, it's very important to hear about opportunities. We have people from academia, we have people from business, we have people from governments here, and if you don't see the opportunities to share and interact, then these conferences are frankly not worth it. So the opportunities exist in information delivery and the delivering of options to leaders. I need to know as a leader what the weather is going to be like in the future, because that determines what I'm going to take, where I'm going to go, and what we're going to do when we get to a certain place to ensure the continued viability of the nation. You need to know, just if you're watching, what's the problem with the weather forecast that you see on the news every day? Is the weatherman just says the weather's going to be this tomorrow. Now they might give you a percentage chance of rain or whatever, but do you ever listen to that really? No, this is the weather. When the weather comes up, and so you make your plan based on what you see there for the weather for tomorrow. You don't get a range of options. And so that goes back to all the eggs in one basket. If you make a plan for only one option, that gets kind of expensive when that option doesn't pan out. It's what our leaders, everybody knows that to save the environment, to make sure that we have that environment for people in the future, we have to make some choices. But it's, as a nation of limited resources, we have to have options so that we don't put all our eggs in one basket, and then when the predicted future doesn't turn out the way it was predicted, now we don't have a choice of where to go next. So options is exactly what we need from the meteorology and oceanography community. We need that information to be shared and analyzed in ways that leaders know that there are a range of possibilities in the future, and we'll be able to plan for each of those possibilities, applying the resources, the majority of the resources, to the most likely outcome, but making sure that we have the ability to take more eggs and put them elsewhere if required. One of the big opportunities coming up for everybody in industry out there is in information dominance, and you've heard about that, and my esteemed colleague John Wade is probably going to talk a lot more about that. For us in the Navy, it's taking the information from the intelligence community, from the scientific communities, all the different support organizations, and bringing that together in such a way that warfighters like me, simple fighter pilots, can understand what the range of opportunities are in the future. And there is a recently formed, pretty important organization. It's called the Information Dominance Executive Board. And that's chaired by the head of the Navy's oceanography community, the head of the Navy's intelligence community, cryptologic communities, all the different communities that provide information and package information. And that board is meeting regularly now to start tackling the difficult problems of how to take in all the information that there is out there in the world, and especially with respect to military applications, and then package it in the right way. So we have sensors, we have information gathering systems, and we have people, which are all the key things that we don't use correctly. But remember, it's simple fighter pilots and submariners and ship drivers who are making the decisions. So the opportunities that are out there for industry is how to get all the information out there and package it correctly in an inexpensive fashion so that simple people can understand it and make decisions. That's where the opportunities lie with respect to oceanography and meteorology, especially in the future. The entity that can do it least expensively, the entity that can do it and package it so that people can understand it the best, is the entity that's going to be most successful. I don't think there's any one organization that can do it, and that's why a conference like this is incredibly important, because there's a lot of great minds out there that have pieces of that can solve that for us. Now, we recently had a change of command at United States Fleet Forces, which is the organization that commands all the ships, submarines, airplanes, and expeditionary forces and people on the East Coast. Admiral Guadagnini recently took over as commander, and as he came in, he realized the challenges of the economic times that we're facing, and also the challenges of the political and the geopolitical times that we're facing right now. We live in a challenging world, and one of the things that Dr. Sullivan talked about was control. And people might think that the Navy is an organization that really wants to control the oceans of the world for the United States, and that is exactly the opposite. That idea of control is not part of the American culture, and it's not part of the Navy's culture. The free use of the oceans for all mankind is what the Navy is committed to and has always been committed to, as well as protecting the homeland for us. And where are the biggest challenges that potentially underpin conflict for the future? It is in those areas of the world where different nations are fighting to control the oceans and control those resources. So that's not a good time. The control of the oceans is not a good thing. The free use of the oceans is what we're looking for. But it all boils down to resources, because the resources of the world are limited, the resources of the United States are limited. And that brings me to my readiness kill chain, which is the only PowerPoint slide I'll show. So those of you who like multiple PowerPoint slides, I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. This readiness kill chain is a realization that we still live in a dangerous world, but the resources that the nation is going to devote to the national defense are going to decrease. And so that requires us to do things in a different fashion. It requires us in the military, especially within our own Navy, to do that kind of collaborative effort that Dr. Sullivan was talking about. And this is an opportunity for anybody out there who is part of the military, but it's also an opportunity out there for folks in industry to recognize where we're going in the Navy with our generation of readiness. And generation of readiness, for all of you to define that, the forces, the airplanes, the ships, the submarines that we send off on deployment to protect our nation mostly away from America's shores, those are ready forces when they have the people, the material, the weapons, and the training required to do the mission. That's what we call readiness. It takes time and it takes resources to build those forces to be able to go out and do that. But since there are not unlimited resources, we have to do it in a different way than we have been. And our Navy has been an organization with silos of excellence for a long time. Everybody does their business really well, but they don't necessarily, boy, that was hard, they don't necessarily touch the other parts of the organization around them. The readiness kill chain that you see up here is an effort for us being led from United States Fleet Forces to reach up into the headquarters in Washington, D.C., and those portions of the staff that fund the rest of the Navy, to reach across to the systems commands that are charged with giving us the material and equipment, and also to reach down and stir those organizations that give us people, that train our people, so that we can bring all of that together in a collaborative fashion to generate forces out the door. Very important to understand the means, the ways, and the ends. The ends are those ready forces heading off on deployment. But the means, pretty well specified. It's the ways, I think, that's where the opportunity lies for industry to start interacting with the Navy in a different fashion as our Navy interacts with itself to generate forces in a different fashion. So those are the opportunities. I'm not going to talk for long, but I will give you the opportunity to ask me some questions while I'm up here about anything except why the Los Angeles Dodgers didn't make the playoffs this year.
How will the Navy interact with wind energy development?
That's an extremely good question, and as Secretary Mavis has said very, very often, renewable energy is key to our economic future, and it's key to our national defense in the future as well. And wind energy is one of those areas that shows great promise. There are some challenges with respect to wind energy and the ability of all of our armed forces to train. And so trying to figure out where the right places are to put wind farms so that we can continue to train for our national defense. There are some issues with wind energy that affect radars and aircraft, and so both the Navy and the Air Force are trying to work together with the wind energy industry to make sure that we put the windmills in exactly the right place and they don't affect air operations. And then again, when you put anything into the ocean, especially in deeper water where ships and submarines operate, you have to make sure that we have the right places. We put those things in the right places so that we can continue to train our forces on the East Coast to be able to send those forces out around the world to do the business. The other interesting partnership is between the Navy and the Coast Guard, because the placement of windmills in the water for wind energy is pretty important for the commercial industry as well. If you drive these ships farther, it costs more money, and it starts to cut into the economic viability of the commercial sector. So the Navy and the Coast Guard have been working together and working with industry to try to decide exactly where the right place, not to stop wind energy, but to find out where the right place to put these are so that we can generate power and continue to defend the nation. Good question, thanks. Other questions? Yes, sir.
About how marine spatial planning plays into the Navy's idea of freedom of the seas and where those two things come together and where they might not be exactly
Sure, that's really a good question, and I bet my friend John White can answer that a little bit better because he is an expert. So, John, when you come up, you got to remember that question and fire it.
I got that one. Rules, I should say. I'll take that one on at the end of my comments.
Thanks, John. Okay, thank you all very much. Have a great day.